I found my diary on my doorstep, written in handwriting I don't recognize. When I opened the door that morning, the winter air bit my cheeks. But what truly froze me was the object sitting neatly on the welcome mat. A small black notebook, edges scuffed, but unmistakably mine. My name, Lena Morrow, shone faintly in faded gold on the cover. I hadn't seen that diary for 6 years. Not since the night I hurled it into the river after too much whiskey and even more guilt. It was supposed to be gone forever, swallowed by dark water, along with everything I couldn't face about my sister's disappearance. Yet there it was, dry, ordinary, and impossible. I picked it up carefully, half expecting it to ooze river muck or crumble to dust. The leather was cool, but intact, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner. Lemon cleaner. My throat tightened. That was the scent my mother used in the kitchen when we were kids. The same brand she never changed, even after Ava. No, I couldn't walk that mental path yet. I shut the door, locked it, and put the diary on the counter like it was a sleeping animal I didn't want to wake. For minutes, I just stood staring at it, trying to think rationally. Maybe someone had found it downstream. Maybe a kind stranger had searched my name online and thought returning it would help. But the rational explanation cracked as soon as I opened it. The pages were yellowed but intact, my cramped handwriting filling most of them. Rambling thoughts, confessions, sketches of the days before everything fell apart. Then, near the end, a change. The ink grew darker, the words larger, leaning left instead of right. A different hand. I turned back a page, comparing them, and my pulse thudded so hard that I had to sit down. The new lines weren't old. The ink still glistened. The first sentence read, "You shouldn't have forgotten me, Lena." I slammed the book shut as though it had bitten me. My apartment was silent, except for the refrigerator hum. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady myself. Someone was messing with me. That had to be it. Maybe one of those people from the true crime forums I'd once joined to talk about Ava's case. I'd posted pieces of my diary back then, searching for patterns, for closure. Anyone could have copied my handwriting, right? I opened it again, forcing myself to study the letters anyway. The way the curves looped, the way the capital L's tilted. They weren't copied, they were personal, fluent. Belonging to someone who had written that way all their life. A whiff of something metallic drifted from the pages. Maybe ink, maybe blood. I sniffed again and instantly regretted it. A dizzy pulse of memory cutting through me. The smell of pennies on my hands the night we found Ava's bracelet near the riverbank. My vision blurred for half a second, and I folded over the diary so sharply the spine cracked. My hands were shaking. I got up, made coffee, told myself it was a prank, just a prank. But then I noticed the date written above the first of the strange entries, 3 days ago. Who still dated journal entries like that? Unless they meant me to see them. I read on because fear has an awful way of turning into curiosity when you're alone. The inked words spilled smoothly, almost conversationally. I remember the river was colder than you expected. The line pulled a gasp from me. Only Ava would know I'd reached down to touch the water that night before throwing the book, that my fingers had gone numb immediately. Had I written about that? I couldn't remember anymore. Over the years, all my other diaries had burned in an impulse to let go. That one, I drowned instead. The new voice in the handwriting spoke with uncanny familiarity. You said you'd forgive me if I ever came back. I'm back. My stomach twisted. The handwriting wasn't random. It knew. Every paragraph mentions something from our childhood, the cracked porcelain horse we buried after it broke. the smell of burnt sugar when Aunt Elise exploded a caramel pot. The silly rhyme we'd made about our father's old truck. No outsider could have written this. And yet, Ava was gone, officially never found, presumed drowned even though no body surfaced. I read to the end in one sitting. Every sound in the apartment, a creak, a plumbing sigh, making me flinch. The final line wasn't a sentence at all, but a fragment of an address. 17 Brookside Lane. No city, no zip code, just that. I searched my memory and came up blank. That evening, I promised myself I wouldn't feed the obsession. But by dawn, I was in the car anyway. The diary on the passenger seat like an accusing passenger. The highway glittered with thin frost. I told myself I only wanted to confirm nothing was there. By the time I reached a collapsed road sign that still barely read Brookside Lane, the morning fog was dense and gray, curling in ribbons over the snow. The address turned out to belong to a house long abandoned. Its mailbox leaned sideways, eaten by rust. The number 17 hanging by a single screw. The wooden porch sagged like a sigh. The official condemnation notices plastered on the door were years old. Typical me, chasing ghosts into condemned houses before breakfast. But the air smelled faintly again of lemon cleaner, fresh. Against every instinct, I tried the door. The hinges moaned and then yielded, revealing a room layered with ash and cold light. Someone had been here recently. Footprints small enough to be a woman's dotted the soot. My pulse hammered. I followed them to what had been a living room. In the corner stood an old cedar chest, lid ajar. Inside were things that shouldn't have survived any fire. Photographs blurred by heat, bits of jewelry twisted by partial melting, scraps of letters cut into strips. On top lay another black diary, identical to mine, except for one golden detail. This one read, Ava Mora. My breath whooshed out. My knees went weak. I picked it up with both hands, heart pounding in my ears. When I opened it, the first sentence, written in my own unmistakable handwriting, said, "If you're reading this, you finally came back to finish what we started." I dropped it instantly, stumbling back. Dust spiraled up as if the house exhaled. Then, from somewhere above me, the boards groaned. A soft, deliberate sound followed, shoe soles dragging across old wood. A woman's voice floated down the stairwell, quiet and clear. Lena. My name, drawn out gently, like how Ava used to call when she couldn't find me in the woods. Without thinking, I rushed toward the stairs. They creaked alarmingly, but didn't collapse. At the top, daylight filtered through a broken window in what had been a bedroom. And there she was, or something that should have been impossible. A figure standing near the window, long hair pale and matted, eyes wide with recognition. She smiled faintly and held something out in her hand. The silver necklace she'd always worn, the same one the police recovered by the river weeks after she vanished. I wanted to speak, but my throat cracked like dry paper. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of lemon cleaner again. She whispered, "I kept your diary safe." Her mouth moved around the word safe, like it amused her. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with the slow heartbeat of distant water. I took one step forward and the floor moaned under my weight. "Ava," I managed, the air slicing cold through my teeth. She tilted her head, friendly, confused, so ordinary it hurt. And then the sound of cracking wood snapped everything apart. Floorboards under her feet gave a low shudder. She reached out a hand toward me, palm up. I lunged instinctively, but before our hands touched, the entire moment folded in on itself. Like a dream ripping open. Darkness rushed up. When I woke, sunlight poured through the broken roof onto the debris. My watch said 10 in the morning, though it felt like I'd only blinked. The room was empty. Both diaries lay beside me, their pages fluttering in the breeze. Every line now blank, except for faint impressions where ink once pressed deep into paper. My throat ached from screaming I didn't remember doing. I stumbled out of the house, into the overgrown yard, clinging to the notebooks, as if they anchored me to the real world. The air outside was still, colorless. Halfway down the cracked driveway, I froze, because a whisper rose right behind me, practically at my ear. It spoke my name, soft, affectionate. My hands went numb. Both diaries warmed suddenly against my chest, as if two quiet heartbeats were pulsing inside me. The car engine refused to start at first, coughing like an old smoker before surrendering with a reluctant growl. I threw both diaries onto the passenger seat without daring to look at them. My hands were trembling too badly anyway. The house behind me slouched into the mist, as if eager to disappear again. And by the time I reached the main road, I had convinced myself that shock had played every trick on my senses. People faint sometimes. They dream with open eyes. They see what they need to see. But the warmth still seeping through the leather covers beside me. No dream explained that. When I got home, my apartment felt uneven, like the angles of the furniture were ever so slightly wrong. Maybe exhaustion, maybe something else. I left the diaries on the table and turned on every light. The glare helped until I turned my back for a moment and realized both books were now stacked the opposite way around, titles down, as if someone had rotated them. I hadn't touched them. I repeated the truth to myself, as though saying it enough times might make it real. You came home. You locked the door. You are alone. By evening, I decided to analyze the problem like the social science researcher I used to be, before grief hollowed me out. Evidence, not panic. The old diary should have been ruined by water. It wasn't. It contained fresh ink, dated days before I found it. There were 2 matching copies. When I opened the first, blank pages waited, indifferent. Then a word began to spread faintly across the margin. Letters unrolling from nothing. Still here. My breath stuttered. I dropped the book onto the floor, but the words continued, appearing one at a time like condensation forming on glass. You shouldn't run from the water. The letters were small, patient. I whispered Ava's name because silence felt worse. The next word wrote itself in answer. Yes. After that single syllable, the pages stopped moving. I left the room and spent the next several hours sitting on the kitchen tile with all the lights burning. Around midnight, I fell asleep against the cabinet and dreamed of water again. Not drowning, but floating. A dim glow beneath me and a voice humming low like a prayer. I woke up shivering on dry land on my kitchen floor, and my phone buzzed insistently. A message from an unknown number lit the screen. Did you find my notebook? AM. I stared at the initials until the letters blurred. Ava Morrow. My first instinct was to delete it, but another ping arrived before I could move. You always ignore what scares you, Lena. Come back before it gets worse. The number was untraceable, a data text window that vanished after a few seconds. I could handle ghosts in the abstract, but technology felt crueler. Someone human doing this, knowing how easily grief could turn you pliable. I unplugged the router, shut off the phone, and buried it under a pile of laundry, like a scared child hiding a monster. Morning came colorless, the air in my apartment dense and metallic. When I picked up the diary again, New words filled 2 pages. Descriptions of me sleeping, specific down to the pattern of my blanket and the song that had played faintly from the neighbor's room. The narration ended with a line that made my blood chill. You looked peaceful when you stopped breathing. I backed away so fast that the chair toppled. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. I snatched the second diary, the one embossed Ava Morrow, and opened it without thinking. This time the pages weren't blank. They held precise, factual notes, like a field journal. Small entries dated years ago, detailing our last summer together. Each entry ended abruptly, just before her disappearance, but the final one stretched on in dark ink that bled through the paper. He said the water could keep secrets for the right price. He asked for one thing in return, my twin. The word twin jolted me. We were close in age, but not twins. Mom would have told me if we were. Yet a dozen tiny memories sparked like scattered matches. Identical birthmarks we joked about. A nurse calling us the 2 Lenas when I broke my arm at 10. I'd always thought it was just confusion. The rest of Ava's final paragraph was a tangle of ink and crossed-out words, as if she'd been interrupted mid-sentence. The next page was empty, except for a damp ring where something wet had rested. A slow knock sounded at my door. Soft but deliberate. My first thought was the police. Maybe a package. Anything ordinary. I looked through the peephole and froze. A woman stood there in a pale coat, her head bent so that hair veiled her face. She looked about my age. I couldn't see her eyes, but I recognized the chain around her neck, the same silver necklace from the house. She raised a hand and knocked again, perfectly in rhythm with my heartbeat. I stepped back, every nerve demanding silence. The knocking stopped. After several seconds, an envelope slid under the door. I waited until the hallway went silent before picking it up. Inside, a single photograph. 2 little girls about 8 years old, holding each other on the riverbank. Both had my face. On the back, neat handwriting said only, "Which one did you become?" The letters matched the diary's new script. It took the rest of the night for my breathing to normalize. I dug through old family boxes, searching for any proof that we were truly sisters born years apart. Hospital records, birth certificates, everything listed different dates, but identical times of birth to the minute. When I called my mother's old number out of sheer desperation, an automated voice said the line was no longer in service. My parents had moved after Ava's disappearance, last I'd heard, but I'd never learned where. Just another hole in our history with her name carved around it. By dawn, the diaries had dried themselves into silence again. I decided to destroy them. Some objects are simply traps. I carried them to the bathtub, filled it with water, and watched as the covers darkened, bubbles rising from the binding like slow exhalations. Then, the water began to ripple. Not from my movement, but from something pushing upward. Letters surfaced in the swirling ink, half-formed words shimmering like fish beneath a frozen lake. Come home. At that moment, every faucet in the apartment gushed to life. The sink, the shower, even the radiator hissed steam as if the entire building were inhaling. I screamed and leapt back, but by the time I reached the door, every noise had stopped. The diaries floated calmly on the water, perfectly dry again. I did what terrified people always do. I fled. I left the apartment, the city, everything, driving until the skyline turned rural and all light behind me shrank to a smear. Motels, back roads, diners. 3 days blurred by with me never daring to open the trunk, where I had locked both diaries inside a metal box. But running changes nothing when what follows you fits comfortably in your own reflection. on the third night, as I brushed my teeth in a dim motel bathroom. My mirror fogged over with steam, though the air was cold. A sentence wrote itself backwards in the condensation, steady and readable only when I tilted my head. It isn't over, Lena. You're writing this next part for both of us. I wiped the mirror, heart crashing. The words vanished, but their imprint lingered like a bruise. When I returned to the room, the metal box was open. On the bed lay only one diary, the one labeled Ava Morrow. The other was gone. That was the moment I realized maybe it hadn't been hers returned to me. Maybe I had been the one returned to her. And the second half of whatever story we were bound into had just begun to write itself. I didn't remember falling asleep that night, but when I woke, the world had shifted its weight. The motel room filtered dawn through rail-thin curtains, and the pattern of light on the wall pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. The diary rested open on the blanket beside me, not where I had left it. I knew before my eyes focused that new words would be waiting. Thank you for running. Now we can start over. My pulse spiked hard enough that I almost dropped the book. But I kept reading because curiosity is a compulsion as fierce as fear. The handwriting flowed in perfect mimicry of my own, only softer at the edges. Beneath the line, pages spilled forward, full of moments I hadn't lived yet. Descriptions of me checking out of the motel, driving east toward the coast, arriving at a house I didn't own. The text knew my itinerary before I had even formed it. I whispered no aloud, slammed the diary shut, and stuffed it into my backpack. I left the motel key on the desk and walked out to the parking lot, without checking the rearview mirror, because I was terrified what reflection might be sitting in the back seat. The road unfurled like a long metallic ribbon under the morning sun, the air sharp and sea-salted. I had no destination, but the sense that the words inside the diary were steering every mile. Town after town drifted by, ghostly gas stations, flickers of human life that barely registered. Around noon, hunger forced me to stop at a roadside cafe. Inside, warmth steamed from the coffee urns, and the waitress greeted me by name before I said a word. "Lena, right?" she chirped, balancing a pot on her hip. "Your sister said you'd pass through today. She left you something." My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "What sister?" The woman blinked at me like I was making a joke. "Ava," she said slowly, drawing the name out into the hum of the diner's ceiling fan. Tall blonde, quiet voice. "She left a package for you yesterday." When she returned from the back room, she handed me a small brown parcel wrapped in newspaper twine. "She said you'd know what to do." The paper crackled under my grip. I wanted to hurl it away, to sprint for the door, but I knew that would change nothing. The inside of the package held a pulse of lemon cleaner scent and an old Polaroid showing the two of us at 17, standing on the river bridge the summer before she vanished. Someone had written across the bottom, "Bring it back." I stared at the image until my coffee cooled and the waitress's smile turned puzzled. "She's still around?" the woman asked finally. I swallowed hard. Maybe. I left a 20 under the cup and drove without tasting the food. An hour later, I found myself parked near that same river. The winter sun flicked its light off the surface in fractured shards, and the current sounded like a whisper finishing my sentences. I walked toward the bridge with the Polaroid in my pocket and the diary pressed to my chest. The banks were rimed with thin ice, brittle reeds rattling like bones. I thought of all the times we'd come here as children, daring each other to lean out over the guardrail, pretending to drop pebbles like wishes. I waited for anger or grief, but what rose instead was recognition, the eerie sense that every step was rehearsed. At midspan, I used my sleeve to wipe a circle of frost from the railing. Then I opened the diary. The fresh pages continued to fill themselves. A slideshow of words racing faster than I could read. My breath formed clouds over the ink. The new entry began at the top, where yesterday's had left off. You needed to come back so we can finish the trade. One of us must stay in the water. The other walks away. Beneath that, a wet circle formed on the paper, as if the book were crying. A faint vibration hummed through the rail beneath my hands. The river had begun to glow. Not bright, not cinematic, just a faint green phosphorescence trickling through the shallows. Downstream, the current folded itself into a shape that wasn't quite human but stood upright in the current. My voice barely reached a whisper. "Ava." The shape nodded once, then lifted its arm with slow grace, mirroring me perfectly. The necklace at its throat flashed like a coin flipped through sunlight. Words appeared across the page faster now, a blur I barely caught. I wasn't supposed to survive. You were. You took my breath that night when you threw the diary in. I took your memory in exchange. We were meant to trade halves. My knees weakened. Fragments of that drunken night clattered back, my shouting her name into the dark. The splash not of paper, but the heavier thud of something else. She must have slipped. Maybe I pushed. Maybe neither of us will ever know. The figure in the water extended both hands upward. A wind gusted along the bridge, sharp and wet, tasting exactly like tears. The diary's pages flipped until they landed on one sentence alone. "Make it right." I looked down again and saw that she wasn't reaching to drag me in. She was offering the necklace, holding it above the surface, waiting. My mind, uninvited, supplied the smell of lemon cleaner from childhood. The way she'd sing nonsense words while wiping counters. The echo of laughter we once shared before everything curdled. I leaned over the rail. "If I take it, do you stop?" She didn't answer, but the current stilled, expectant. I climbed down the embankment cautiously, until frozen mud sucked at my boots. The water was shallow near the edge, cold enough to burn. The necklace gleamed there, resting against the current's palm. I reached out, and the moment metal touched my skin, the river sighed. Light flared briefly, soaking the trees, the bridge, the sky, and then collapsed back into ordinary color. The shape was gone. The diary hung limp at my side, its pages blank and drying rapidly in the wind. I thought it was over, until I looked at my reflection in the river. The face staring back wasn't entirely mine. The eyes were a tone bluer, smile line a little crooked like hers. Back home that night, the diary lay closed on the table, quiet. My phone blinked with one unread message sent from an unlisted number. "Sleep. We're fine now." I wanted to believe her. I slept 12 hours straight and woke feeling oddly complete, as if the missing half of me had settled finally into place. But there was one small inconsistency the mirror wouldn't let me ignore. The faint scar on my chin, Ava's scar, the one I'd never had before. Weeks passed. Life resumed its dull rhythm. Work emails, grocery runs, polite conversations with neighbors who didn't notice anything wrong. Only sometimes, when I wrote my name on a receipt, my hand betrayed me. The W in Morrow curved left instead of right. The first time it happened, I almost dropped the pen. The second time, I let it stay that way. A subtle shift, nothing more. Every so often, late at night, I dream of a river that hums beneath glassy ice, and a woman standing on the bank, breathing through my lungs. She smiles slightly, whispering that we're finally equal, finally whole. In those dreams, I feel no fear, only balance, as though each of us is writing from opposite sides of the same page. When I wake, The diary lies open beside me again, perfectly blank, waiting for the next line.